Welcome, Dan. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview with us today.
Pleasure to be here.
As always, we like to begin by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on, as well as our ancestors and those who toiled without compassion or compensation, as well as our elders and community stewards whose shoulders that we also continue to stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So Dan, please go ahead and introduce yourself to our viewers and our listeners.
Yes, thank you, Blessed. I'm the Danielle Brunette. I am the Director of Strategic Alliances and Initiatives for Co-operatives and Mutuals Canada, which is the national apex body for the cooperative movement.
Okay, great. So can you articulate vision and mission of the Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada?
Absolutely. So CMC, as an apex, is there to catalyze a vibrant and growing cooperative movement across the country. And we want to empower basically everyone to build a better Canada. So that's really our overarching vision, if you like. And in terms of our mission itself, well, we are the national voice for the cooperative movement. So we promote the identity, we advance the growth of cooperatives through networking and advocacy, awareness building, everything that you would expect a strong apex to do.
I love it. So what inspires you most about your current work?
There's a thing, the cooperative identity statement basically says cooperative, and I'll read it off just to make sure I get it word for word, but a cooperative is an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. So that's a very fancy way written to actually say it's people that come together to solve a common need. And to me, that is really what is the underlying principle of everything that we do. People choose to work together. So I actually come from the not-for-profit world, the charitable world, fundraising and so on, where that community feeling, that desire to build better communities and a better world was imbued in everything we did. However, we were often at the mercy of that big funder coming through, to realize that vision. Whereas where I came into the co-op sector, a lot of that, build a better world, community mindset, working together was there. However, instead of waiting on a big donor, it's people that locked arms and basically said, let's get this done together, right? So that is what I find really empowering from a day-to-day point of view. But obviously nothing beats, visiting some frontline cooperatives, which is something I like to do, much to the chagrin and everybody who's in the car with me. I do like to detour, meet cooperatives on the ground, because it's really those amazing frontline stories that really, refill the energy tank and the motivation, and just to see how diverse the co-op sector is. So whether it's people, having a home together because of the co-op, housing structure, or because, they needed a grocery store in their small rural community, or, there's so many applications and structures that it's a new discovery, and it's great for when people can tell their stories, and then I can then turn around and tell their stories to other folks to demystify and raise awareness for it.
I think it's remarkable that you do like to take the time to, meet them on the ground and detour. So thank you for taking the time. What specific challenges and barriers do you face in your work, and how are you and your team working to overcome them?
Well, certainly that's a good question. And I guess I'd like to preface it that I have not come across anybody who had any sort of malicious intent around cooperatives. The reality is mostly that people designing policies and programs and so on have either misconceptions or don't know anything about the cooperative model at all. Therefore, it's not taken into account when they're developing programs, be it financing, development, and so on. So we find ourselves in many occasions talking about, and what about co-ops, or do co-ops qualify, instead of actually working with the policymakers and the other stakeholders to, co-create co-op solutions, right? I could, as I mentioned previously, I like storytelling, and I could give you a ton of different examples, but it's not an all or nothing scenario. Co-ops play a role. There are co-ops that are whose all the members are family businesses. There are co-ops where the employees are the owners as well. Like, again, it's a very flexible and proven model. So it's really mostly about raising awareness and demystifying it, as a solution that people unfortunately don't usually consider, and that's really the source of most of the barriers. Like I said, it's nothing controversial or perception. It's just a reality of you can go do go through business schools, do your B admin or your MBA and stuff, and not hear about co-ops once, which is obviously at least from our point of view, a tragedy.
Yeah, and definitely a disservice to the people. So we really champion the work that you're doing. Do you have a key set of priorities that you're working on right now that you want to highlight?
Yeah, certainly as the national apex, and I'm sort of involved in the various ways in all of the 4 priorities that Co-operatives and Mutuals Canada has. Obviously, working with some very established and professional colleagues, but our first priority is leading and uniting, engaging the co-op sector as a whole. So there are about 7,000 cooperatives across Canada. Our structure, we're a cooperative ourselves, how we're governed. So we align ourselves with the needs of our members, and our members are the provincial and territorial associations. So Saskatchewan Co-op Association and the Impact ON for the Francophones in Ontario, and Nova Scotia Co-op Council, for example. So those are entities. There's also the sectoral federations that are our members. So, Cooperative Housing Federation, the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation, and so on. And then there's other members that are, large members themselves. So Desjardins, that just about everyone in Canada knows, and Solio, AgroPure, and so on, which are some of the leading cooperatives in Canada. And then other co-ops that may not have a sectoral association, but are present in many locations and want to have their voice heard as part of the national structure. So it's bringing all that together, serving our members, but also serving the members of our members and those co-ops that might be isolated in small rural communities, for example. So our mandate is overarching for all that. So we create opportunities for youth within that, for the diversity, equity, and inclusion, for those provincial associations to come together. So that convening role is really important, as well as our Congress once a year that brings the sector leadership together. The second one is around advancing advocacy priorities, so government relations, especially at the federal level. So that is both advancing the co-op sector and creating a more enabling environment, but also when it comes to the nuts and bolts of programs, making sure that co-ops are eligible. So at the very least, all the business infrastructure of government should be open to cooperatives. They are an enterprise. It's just that depending on the structure and the programs, sometimes it falls more under the Employment Social Development Canada, sometimes it's more under Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, depending on how the co-op operates, whether it's more sort of commercial focused or community focused. But at the end of the day, those programs, if co-ops meet the eligibility criteria, they should have access to the programs. But again, as I mentioned before, sometimes people developing the program don't think about how that wording or lack of wording can actually be problematic. So advocacy is a huge file, and that has dotted connections to the investment readiness program, which many of the folks involved with the Setsi or the Solidarity Working Group would actually be familiar with. We also have a collaboration with the Women's Economic Council around creating more opportunities for women in the co-op sector. So those are federal funding opportunities that include co-ops. So the advocacy side, the creating a more enabling environment, and the nuts and bolts of program access are what I would group into that government relations bubble. The value and pride of membership is obviously trying to showcase co-ops doing good in the world, being part of CMC knowledge sharing webinars and so on that can lead to a stronger cooperative sector. And the fourth one, like any good organizations, we're actually the result of a merger between the Canadian Cooperative Association and the Conseil Canadien de la Coopération et de la Mutualité, which was the Francophone side. It came together back in 2013 and 2014 to be that one strong voice. So as we approach our 10-year of existence, it's a good time to look at what are we doing and creating the infrastructure and the foundation to really be able to deliver on our mandate. That includes everything from co-op procurement to a very strong database. The only database of all co-ops and mutuals in Canada actually is with CMC. So those are all the tools that we have. And like I said, I could spend an hour on each of those and and talk about the priorities, but I'll stop it there.
That's remarkable. Well, how do you feel about the future of co-ops and co-op conversions in Canada?
Well, I'll preface it by saying I'm an eternal optimist, but in this case, I don't need to default to that. I'm actually genuinely very excited about what's going on, mostly because co-ops are proven methods, but we're at a time where, whether it's because of people internally facing and looking at their own lives through COVID, or the young generation wanting to have their values aligned with their workplaces, their purchases, their life in general, all of those things align with co-ops. It's a natural fit. What can I do that's more than the bottom line, right? That concept is integral to cooperatives. It's in our DNA. So that's something that makes me very optimistic and excited about where that's going to go. And obviously there's a general interest in just applying it, and whether you're talking to individuals that have been involved in cooperatives for years, or folks that might come from a background or a community that has a lot of mutual aid history or collaborations. Like, the concept of working together is not solely owned by cooperatives. It's something that's been around forever in just about every community. It is sort of a put to paper in policies and acts in Canada, but the cooperative and the cooperative movement is solidly entrenched in the social and solidarity economy for sure. So all that interest is coming, I think, to a very good point in history, where people realize even more the importance of cooperatives if they just give themselves the time to poke a bit around and learn a bit more about what actually it can be.
I like that. So I like that you're, like you said, an optimist, and you do think that there's a bright future for Canada and co-ops. But what is your ultimate goal, and what does success look like for you and your colleagues, if you could paint that picture for us?
Well, I think it's without sounding too catchphrasy, I would say a more cooperative economy, right? If there are more co-ops, that's something that can be very interesting from a equity point of view, from an access, from a just general approach, to enterprise and living and values. So more cooperatives being established, whether that's from the ground up or through conversions, that's something that's also gaining a lot of interest right now, especially with the great tsunami that's coming. A lot of communities don't want to lose their grocery store, or they would, there's economic drivers that are employers in communities, or employees that don't want to lose their jobs. So there's various ways and reasons why a traditional enterprise might convert to a cooperative. We've actually been involved with a research consortium looking at that over the last couple of years, and it's very, very interesting. So whether you're about preserving and managing forests in BC, or you're a LGBTQ cafe in Halifax, many reasons, but the catalyst always is, how can we keep this enterprise going through a cooperative model and serve the needs of the community and the members that it was first set up to do.
Absolutely. So that was a lot. I really appreciate you expanding on that. Do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for Canada?
For Canada as a whole, yes, support your co-ops. No, the reality is, I would just put a parting word of, I grew up in Quebec, right? Quebec co-ops are omnipresent. In Quebec, it has a very strong enabling environment. But I will be honest in the sense that sort of took it for granted because they're always there, and I didn't scratch the surface. I didn't understand what the co-op difference was. So to me, it was very much a very interesting discovery of this whole other way of doing things, where you're not trying to squeeze as much profit out of the people in the business. It's putting people first, right? So I would just invite people just to scratch the surface, be curious about cooperatives, learn more, get involved. There's likely some that are around your home and so on. Like, we have a map, but it's also something where once you drink the co-op Kool-Aid, you start seeing them everywhere. Right? Whether it's your credit union, whether it's your insurance company. So the more you understand about co-ops, or at least have that interest in discovering it, I think the better it'll be for yourself, for the community, for the people you interact with, and eventually, if all all citizens of Canada get a better understanding of co-ops. There's your answer, Blessed. It'll be better for Canada as a whole.
Absolutely. So how can people get in touch? What is your website to connect with you and, like you said, get more informed on co-ops?
Yes, www.canada.coop. So a simple, easy way to remember. But I would also invite folks to look at various other sources. So, for example, if you're based in Ontario, sort of the Anglophone provincial network is the Ontario Co-op Association. The Francophone one is Impact ON. So there's different resources if you're really interested in worker cooperatives and that interesting way to run a business. Then certainly look at the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation. So if you're not sure, go to our website. It will redirect you. Contact me or contact some of my colleagues, and we'll be happy to help point you in the right direction or provide you with some information or research and so on. So we don't have time to cover everything now, but there's certainly a lot of resources. First place to go is canada.coop.
Sounds good. Easy website to remember. So
Absolutely.
You've heard it here. Check them out. So thank you once again for taking the time. We really applaud the work that you're doing. Appreciate your leadership in that.
Okay, well, thank you very much for taking the time to hear more about co-ops.
Absolutely. So we're just going to close the way we started by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on, as well as our ancestors and elders, all community stewards whose shoulders we continue to stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Once again, thank you so much for being here today, Dan, and thank you to our listeners.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.